Yes, now the fact check of yesterday's speech by the father of the voice, Noel Pearson, the Cape York Indigenous leader, his bizarre speech to the National Press Club. Now, I dealt with that last night, but there's something else I need to say about that. I want to go back to it because Pearson claimed I was wrong. I got a bit shout out. It's saying, no, this voice, an Aboriginal-only advisory parliament in our constitution that the government wants us to vote for next month, this voice is not racist. No, he says, it is not going to divide us by race at all. I am wrong.
Janet Albrechtsen and Andrew Bolt, about 10 years ago, made that argument. This is not about race. This is about us being the original peoples in the country. And the simple question about Indigenous is, were there peoples here before 1788? And the answer is yes, there were Aborigines and there were Torres Strait Islanders. And that's what we're recognising, not a separate race.
Now, Pearson and others in the Yes campaign are clearly embarrassed that they're pushing a racism, an official racism on Australia. But his argument, his semantic argument, it's about indigeneity instead, is a distinction without a difference. But actually, it's also false because the voice does divide us by race. Because Pearson is saying that the only people who are Indigenous to this country are Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders, right? The only people who are Indigenous are them. And why that matters is that a couple of years ago, Pearson actually admitted that a lot of other people, whites, Asians, could be Indigenous too, because we were born here as well. And we're also now part of this land, including me.
I had to come to the somewhat uncomfortable conclusion that even Andrew Bolt was becoming Indigenous. because the bones of his ancestors are now becoming part of the territory.
There you go. Yet, under Pearson's plan, the only Indigenous people who do get their voice to Parliament, this Indigenous, this advisory Parliament of their own, the only Indigenous people who get it are Aboriginal ones, Torres Strait Islanders as well. Not the rest of us. And that is racist. Noel Pearson, just be honest with yourself, you are pushing racism. But speaking of Noel Pearson, the $55 million question. As I said last night, the journalists at the Press Club, the National Press Club yesterday, again failed to ask Pearson a really important question. Noel, what happened to that $550 million? Now, we're told we need the voice, so Aborigines can finally tell us how to help Aborigines. We finally listen to them, how to spend, for instance, the more than $30 billion a year that we do spend on them, how to spend it properly. But you see, here's the problem. Politicians have already been listening for years to Aboriginal groups, including no one more than Pearson himself. And after listening very carefully to Noel Pearson over the years, they spent, in that journey, an estimated $550 million on his pet projects, most of them to help just 3,700 Aborigines at Cape York. Just 3,700. Not many people at all. And these are people mainly in 4 towns like Aurukun at the very top of Queensland. But the question is, what good has that money actually done? Joining me is the local federal member there, the Liberals' Warren Entsch. Warren, great to see you. Look, $550 million, that is one hell of a lot of money. Most went to Pearson's preferred projects for just 3,700 people. You're the local member. You've gone to these places, etc., etc. What good has it done?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, I've struggled to find the exact amount of money. What I found there in the work that I did for that over $500 million is not definitive. There's more there, but we struggle to find it. But that's stuff that we've actually identified. And you say, well, what's it done? Well, I mean, the reality is most of the places where the Noel has had a influence are still in many ways very dysfunctional. The communities that are actually doing the best up there, up in the Cape, are those communities that won't have Noel coming through their front gates. Now, you ask, the money was invested in Noel's ideas, but they were also invested in his own companies. Understand, because Noel not only come up with the ideas, but he also implemented. You know, you've got Cape York welfare reform that made sure that he had control of the or his companies had control of the finance on Indigenous people and communities that were participating in it. You got Cape York, and I'll just go through a few, Andrew, otherwise we'll be here all night. Cape York Land Council. We've got the Cape York Institute. We got Balcanoe, which is supposed to be their economic developer, and I asked this question back when Philip Ruddock was the Indigenous Affairs Minister. I asked him to give me one example of a successful transition by an individual or an Indigenous company from being the financial support from Balcanoe. Well, I'm still waiting for those numbers to come through. You've got the Cape York Employment. You've got Cape York Partnerships. You've got Good to Great Schools. Started with a great flush. There's only 2 now that are with. The Arakoon one, they kicked that out recently. There's a Hopevale one and the one in, there's one other one in Cowan. And now, I was talking recently to the elders in Cowan, in Cape York. They're trying to, in Hopevale. They're desperately trying to get rid of it. Because, and they've actually approached me to ask me how they could do it, because a whole lot of the kids going to the Hopevale school are now being bused to Cooktown to avoid one of Noel's ideas. And of course, you can still, you've got Cape York Timbers, you've got Palmer Futures, you've got the Dorrigin Coal. All of these things are funded and controlled by Pearson's entities. And this is the reason why. So it's not just a matter of coming up with the ideas. It's actually, he then creates an entity that is funded to actually implement these. And so, and at the end of the day, I've got to say to you, you know, I shake my head in disbelief. It's just a disgrace. Now, one of the things that I actually had a look at that press club address that he did yesterday, and there was a comment that I found rather, other than having a go at me on the, in relation to my lack of action, if you like, in relation to rheumatic heart disease. And I actually went back. The last press release I put out was in May 2022, but and I've done before that. But and I think you made reference to the fact that in 26 years I've been in this job, not once has him or any of his many entities ever raised it with me or my office, either verbally or in the letter. So, you know, suddenly he's got a newfound interest in it, but nevertheless, and he's trying to find a way through. But he did say quite clearly that he was sitting under we've got to sit under a mango tree and listen to the voices. And he was holding, there was a great image of him holding the hands of an elderly lady in Arakoon. Now, I reached out to some of the senior elders in Arakoon, some of the traditional owners today, and I asked them about it. And, you know, the ones I spoke to chuckled about it and said they can't remember the last time, that they were wondering why he was there, because they can't remember the last time he was sitting under a mango tree, let alone consulting with them. One of them suggested maybe well over a decade or more. So you know, I mean, there's a lot of questions.
Look, in fairness, maybe we don't know. Maybe he was there, I don't know. And maybe he's done some good. I know people I respect have said that they've seen some good that is done. You know, Chris Mitchell is a big fan of some of the education things. But I've got to say, Warren, the reports from the biggest of the 4 towns, for instance, that are part of Pearson's partnership, look, the statistics seem to be terrible. There's the poverty and the unemployment. In Arakoon, not one person owns their own home. There's also so much violence there that 3 years ago, hundreds of people fled the town to hide in the bush. And there's also been attacks on a police vehicle last year. Police were injured. What went wrong in Noel Pearson's showpiece town, if I can call it that?
Well, look, I mean, there's a whole lot of things I've got to say that went wrong. I don't think it's fair, though, to be critical of them in the fact that there's nobody owns a house. It's nugget communities there, and unfortunately they're set up in a way that people can't buy land or own a house. So putting that aside, but again, and I'll give you a good example, there was established up in Arakoon some time ago a really successful men's shed, and it was absolutely thriving. And then suddenly, one of Pearson's entities, Cape York Employment, was actually given the contract to run the employment initiatives in Arakoon. They were getting no outcomes. They immediately stepped in to try and get the success, or sort of be covered by the successes of the Mensched, and effectively destroyed it. It doesn't exist anymore. And so the reality is, and I spoke to, talking again to senior elders up there, their concern is that they have actually been used as tours and if you like, experiments by the Pearson entities to be able to gather funds for their various organisations without actually getting any benefit whatsoever. And in fact, I know from my discussions that there is a very strong push up there with traditional owners now to basically take control of their own identity, get themselves out from under the yoke of Pearson's identities.
Well, Warren Entsch, I've asked Noel Pearson, I think some time ago, to come on the show. I don't think we even got a response. We'll ask him again to come on and see if he gives his version of all this. But I have to say, until we have an answer about why listening to him was a mistake or didn't achieve what he wanted, why listening to a voice that's cemented into the Constitution would do any better, particularly when it's going to be 24 selected activists by the Aboriginal aristocracy and not a directly elected new bunch of people. Warren Entsch, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you. We need popularly elected local, regional community leaders.
You're not going to get that.
And we need to be listening to them.
You won't get it.
Because they're the ones.
You won't get it because it'll challenge the power of the Aboriginal aristocracy. That's exactly why they don't want it. Thank you for your time.